Hello, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to the show. Today I have with me Vijay Mehta, the author of The Economics of Killing. We dealt with conflict and war on several occasions on Ahlebait TV, in a way deconstructing and exposing a lot of the root causes of warfare and conflict. Often conflict is far more complex than we're led to believe by mainstream media. Here we're going to have another exercise in unraveling where that conflict often arises. And today our focus is on the arms industry, the economics of killing and the actual inertia caused by people who profiteer from war. The arms industry lurks in corridors of power, but often is manifest right in our faces, and yet we seem to be oblivious and seem to be quite comfortable with arms dealers associating with politicians without any kind of real investigation or any real accountability. We're going to analyze the book Economics of Killing and take it apart, deconstruct this relationship of the military complex that exists primarily in the West now in terms of the arms industry. Before we get into a discussion with Vijay Mehta, we'd like to just show you this documentary which the campaign by the Unity for Peace organization has launched. And following the documentary, we're going to enter into a discourse with Mr. Mehta.
Many conflicts are partly caused by governments trying to solve problems by military means, with so much money being spent on weapons and operations across the world, causing violence rather than attempting to build peace. The 4D Charter provides a free forum for developing solutions to implement global peace.
NGOs and civil society all over the world harvest and represent the wisdom of social movements, turning ideas into practice. We are here today to explore why some campaigns win and others fail, how some of the campaigns undertaken by the world's NGOs have become a reality and now are best policies, bills, and charters in the world. Some examples are the Landmine Treaty, the formation of International Criminal Court, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and the list goes on. Recently, we have seen the civilian surge for freedom and democracy happening around the uprising in the Middle East and North Africa, known as the Arab Spring, and actions against Government of India by the famous Indian anti-corruption activist Anna Hazare, who inspired a wave of protest across the country. These are examples of citizen power, social activism, which persuades the policymakers to change direction.
In January, they used protest to overthrow a leader who dominated them for more than 2 decades.
I'm Stephen Cole, and here's a reminder of our top story in Al Jazeera, Libya's uprising.
Bahrain used excessive force as it halted protests led by the Shia majority in February.
Breaking news coming out of the revolution in Egypt and Tahrir Square.
It's difficult to ignore the double standards by which Western governments prop up and endorse some foreign dictatorships, while isolating and humiliating others. As the Arab uprising spread across North Africa and the Middle East, the hypocrisy of the West was exposed. For many, it's a question why waging war was such a convenient approach to take for the West. Throughout history, there has, however, been moments where conflicts have been resolved through non-violent means. Mahatma Gandhi was horrified by the treatment of his fellow citizens by the British. Over the course of 33 years, from 1914 to 1947, he chose to use his mind and intelligence to overcome adversity. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. saw Gandhi as an inspiration for his willingness to achieve civil rights for the African American community. He did exactly that in 1964 with the signing of the Civil Rights Act, with the Voting Rights Act passed the following year.
We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind.
The founder of 4D Charter, Vijay Mehta, encourages dialogue to promote and implement peace in his book Economics of Killing: How the West Fuels Wars and Poverty in the Developing World. Raising several valid points, he explains how much the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan cost the United States, how bringing millions of people out of poverty is possible. Collective activity is also illustrated, offering the best hope for ending the industrial-military trading relations that keep the world in a state of war, creating misery and starvation.
If you're working with what I call the climate of opinion, meetings like this are very good in preparing us for media conversations, for talking to our governments, talking to our parliamentary representatives. But the opportunities for them to take notice of us and say this is how people really feel, we have to recognise what they feel, seem to be very rarely reflected in what we hear.
We need a very wide popular movement that says in the world of today there is really no place for wars and conflict. we need to move in the direction of peace in order to overcome poverty and disease, who are the real enemies of the humankind.
Peace is a fundamental human right. We talk about development and sustainability, but in the absence of peace, if there is violent conflict, then you cannot have development or sustainability. The giants, the United States and China, could do a huge amount to promote peace in the world, and I think with the current economic crisis, the global economic crisis, it is in their interests now to do so.
War is still treated as a solution to conflict. Human rights violations are very, very endemic, and the poverty and lack of development in the poorer world.
Campaigns like this one, the 4D campaign, because it's so comprehensive and it brings the whole thing together in 4 steps that any group can follow. And I think from that point of view, it's something new in the field, and there are a lot of peace organisations, but it is refreshingly new in its approach, and I think that can be very valuable.
The military spending has gone all-time high to 1.6 trillion, with 25 million soldiers and 1,000 military bases around the world. And the impact of it on armed conflict is on the individual, societies and economy is huge. At the same time, we have 12.4 million people starving and dying in the Horn of Africa. Besides, we are all also beset by financial and climate change crises, which has put the planet in peril.
After banks around the world collapsed, with the loss of billions of US dollars wiped from the value of many leading companies, the Great Recession affected numerous people around the world. Governments poured vast sums of money into the banks, and many countries requested assistance of the International Monetary Fund. And with the economic depression came job cuts. Hundreds of thousands of people lost their jobs, suffering financially, leading to social unrest. There are ideas and actions undertaken to achieve the goals of 4D. Among them, one is based on Article 26 of the United Nations Charter, mandating Britain in the Security Council, formulating a plan to promote the establishment of international peace and security, with least diversion of armaments of the world's economic resources. Since the nuclear bombs were dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, there have been further conflicts around the world, which have claimed a number of reasons for their existence. Some have been for political gain, others for money.
One of the key engagements with an international discourse on peace and development is that you have to make clear that these are political choices. Poverty and war in the world are caused by political decisions made by elites. They can be government elites, they can be corporate elites. And the political solutions come from us. Vijay has already said that. The problems are political, the solutions are political. And that's really important at the moment, because more and more at the moment, you see many NGOs arguing that this is all now a technical issue. It's like a sort of technical battle against a disease, which everybody knows is there, and we've just got to have enough research and we can crack it. That is not the case when it comes to issues of international development and war and politics. It's all down to people's choices, and those choices
we can have an influence over.
It's for other generations to learn from our mistakes and our successes, and through that learning obviously becomes change and hope and a future that I hope we can all live in. You know, I totally believe that peace is possible. I believe there is a fundamental shift going on. I believe that we can move from a culture of war to a culture of peace. I believe that sort of level of consciousness around the fundamental issues that humanity faces is changing. And in the very short period of time that I've been involved in the peace process over the last 12 years, it is getting easier, not more difficult. There's no question.
Interdependence is the one word that describes the human condition at the beginning of the 21st century. And it's why these places are not very far away at all. And what it means for us is that our neighbours are not just the people with whom we share a street or a town. They are our fellow human beings, 6 and a bit billion of us now, with whom we share a very small and a very fragile planet, which we first saw as human beings when those Apollo astronauts took that extraordinary photograph as this green and white and blue Earth appeared above the lifeless landscape of the moon, and we saw for the first time just how small and just how fragile this planet is.
Whatever the big ideas can be for achieving world peace, nuclear disarmament, disposing a dictator, bringing development, promoting human rights, we will succeed only if the people we know and respect are with us. Top-down exhortations from the state or large corporations do not work. All campaigners and practitioners combine theory and experience to make issues practical, relevant, effective. Let us find what is the defining spirit of the age, where the fire is burning. Act to tame the fire, spread the awareness and consciousness, and become powerful agents for change.
Big issues have come up, really relevant issues that I think are affecting us today in the world, and it's really lovely to see so many concerned citizens come together to talk about these issues and debate these issues.
It's been very invigorating to hear such varied responses to the overall problems we have with global peace and communication between races and governments. With the internet, people can get information from outside that can't be blocked by these regimes, and that gives a greater sense of freedom to the people who are living there.
It's always really positive to bring people together and just raise awareness. For me, it was interesting to look at the links between trade and arms and aid, and yeah, it really switched a few lights on. I'll certainly be supporting the campaign, and what I think is that all the people in this room should take the responsibility to get out there in the world and be promoting the 4D message.
I think one of the most interesting things was bringing people together, and people came from a long way away. One gentleman said that he came from Cumbria. We came from the Midlands. Bringing people together, almost feeding off each other's energy, that there are loads of people working in their different ways, in different organisations for peace in this room, and that is enormously encouraging.
I thought it was really fascinating to hear about all the issues and how they all interconnected, how the issue of peace can talk about trade, aid, all of these different things. It was so interesting to hear about. I think it's a really fantastic organisation, and it's great to hear more about it. I didn't know about it before coming to this talk, so I think the message really is to keep going, and that they've got a lot of support already.
It's clear living in today's world, we live in a global interconnected society. Our involvement for the sake of peace, justice, and the preservation of the earth is absolutely necessary. What happens in one part of the world will affect the entire planet. Work for a harmonious world. Support 4D.
Welcome back to the show. You've just seen the video made by United for Peace, looking at the arms proliferation and the economics of killing. Today in the studio, as I mentioned earlier, we have Vijay Mehta with us. Welcome to the show, Vijay.
Thank you.
So what is it that inspired you to write this book?
The world is getting highly militarized. That in 2012, the military spending was $1.75 trillion. Against the background of nearly 925 million people go to bed hungry every night. So when I found that this mismatch of funding where we can't reduce poverty, inequality, but we are ready to spend money on wars and military spending, and there is no end to it, because right from Vietnam War and Korean War and up to recent Iraq and Afghanistan war, all we are doing is killing people and spending trillions of US dollars, I would call a wasteful spending of money. And that was one of the main reasons to highlight the role of the military is first of all in the wars of its making, and also the wasteful projects it's spending money on.
You say, over 2.5 years in the writing and the research of this book. Were there any difficulties you faced in accessing the kind of information? I'm going to share that information with the audience soon, but there's some pretty hard-hitting facts. Were there any obstacles to doing this kind of research?
Well, that is quite often has been asked to me, especially in India and others, and people somehow or the other thought or imagined that I had secret access to military documents. But the fact remains is, I've given maybe 30-40 pages of access where I gained the material, but it's all open. You can have it. Just that I had to work a little extra hard to get the information which I desired, which was not in the open market. So that way, and it took me 2 years to research and 6 months to write.
Okay, if you had to pick the hardest hitting fact that you came across, the thing that even shocked you perhaps, what would that be? Before I go into a structured breakdown of your chapters and how you've dealt with it, but what to you would be the most hard-hitting and powerful element of what you found?
I found that from the last at least a few thousand years, the mind of humanity, or what we call 6 or 7 billion of us, has more and more gone towards military engagements, military interventions, thinking that war or wars is a solution. And this belief of negativity had to be challenged. And that was one of the main reasons. And the other one which is aligned to this is the culture, military culture. If you go around cities and towns all over the world, you will find statues of generals and military heroes. But where are the statues of peace heroes? Yeah, we had lots of peace heroes, right from Gandhi, Nelson, Mandela. Okay, they are very famous, so they have got statues. But I'm talking about the unsung heroes who every day of the week toil to bring more peace into the world. So we should have as much awareness of the people who are bringing peace in the world. This reverence for military is profound in all societies, in US, UK, that all these military people, first of all, they get very high salaries. Secondly, somehow or the other, at their retirement, or if they have won some victories or done good in a battle, they are given land and all kind of gifts. The atmosphere is so poignant. Even here, living in UK, if you see our royal family, yeah, and when they dress up and come out, in the pageantry and the parades, they are having military uniform, Navy uniform, Air Force uniform. What does this signify? That they are, shall we say, not patronizing, they are all in that military is, because of the military, we are safe in the world, or our streets are safe. So that is a fallacy which I wanted to bring it out, and that was one of the biggest motivations I had to bring home the truth. It is not the military who's keeping the streets safe. If what we have to do is get rid of the inequality, poverty reduction, and all those, the rules of the corporates, and the way we have to change the structure of the world and the way we live, so that we have peace, we have happiness, we have harmony, and it can only be come or done by culture of peace, by education for peace, and things like that.
So that's a very strong argument. You're saying that actually endemic within society is the sense of glamorizing war, glamorizing militarism, and kind of indoctrinating people into thinking you have to have these things, otherwise you're under some kind of major threat, and they're an integral part of society. And it's almost unquestioned, isn't it, that we must have a military. But you talk about the addiction of the West to arms sales and how that caused the 2008 financial crisis. I found that fascinating, that even your title is The Economics of Killing.
Sure.
People always associate the military primarily with the guns, the weapons, but it's quite rare that people think about economics. I mean, the average layperson wouldn't immediately think about the economics of killing or the economics of war, that it could be profitable, perhaps. That's what it almost infers. But let me stick to the first question. How has the West become so addicted to arms sales, and how did it cause the 2008 financial crisis?
Okay, the West got addicted because most of the sales of the armament, if you see logically, is done by either military creating artificial either wars or drifting from conflict to conflict. So if you are drifting from conflict to conflict, and if you are, like for example in Iraq war, the missiles, Tomahawk missiles, hundreds of or thousands of them were detonated and bombed in Iraq. And at that time, the US factories were 24 hours working to churn more. So that is a reason that military and, shall we say, the military industrial complex is looking for more and more conflicts, so that their weapon factories are going on. And there is such a powerful gun lobby and military lobby in US that all the 51 states in the US have got some kind of military facility in them. So you cannot close a military facility, because the senators and the congressmen will get up and say, oh, we cannot close that, where will our jobs go? But that's a fallacy as well, because I have written in the book and I've said, look, we are better off keeping the people who are working in the military factories, weapon programs and weapon factories, give them wages and ask them to stay home. And secondly, I have said in the book that ultimately these weapon manufacturers, the biggest 10 companies, the Lockheed Martin and Honeywell and all the rest of the companies, British Airways, our own in UK, they are for shareholders and their profits. So I have also advocated that it's cheaper to give them the profits every year, and so that they don't make weapons and kill people in Africa and Middle East and other countries. So that is the reason. Now coming back to your second point of how the crash happened. If you logically see, the US have been trying to finance these wars by either inflation, raising the debt limit, and using the dollars. What happens is that all sales in the world, military and otherwise, all the purchases done, even civilian, all over the world, are paid in US dollars. Yeah? Because of the fact that they are paid in US dollars, US can have money against it. But there is a time comes, like US spent about 4 to 6 trillion in Iraq and Afghanistan. Okay? And then the debt, which officially there's 16 trillion, but it could be easily 20, 26 trillion, because so many things are not counted. So with that, there was no way the banks, and along with that, the unwise lending of the banks. If you see that the subprime mortgage, see, people who could not even afford a one-room apartment were approached by banks and other financial institutions to say, do you want to live in a palace or a mansion or a big house? And knowing well they cannot pay it back, but they lend the money anyway. So, because to make their profit, because all these financial companies were making profit. So once all that happened, a combination of all that brought the crisis. There was a financial bubble which got bust.
Yeah, this is a real grey area. The average layperson, the minute you say the word economics, they switch off.
They do.
Because we're so very ignorant about economic mechanisms, economic systems, beyond going to our local bank and sort of the supermarket to deal with credit. It seems criminal almost that we don't understand the mechanics of high-level economics. Now, the military and the arms industry is said to be the biggest business in the world, the most lucrative and perhaps certainly the largest in terms of gross turnover of finance. And that's quite often ignored by the ordinary person. Doesn't really know how much a cruise missile costs, or how much a Tomahawk costs, or how much a tank costs. It's so beyond our level of perhaps engagement or thinking. Why is it that this military-industrial complex has almost slipped under the radar of the general public? Why is it that we're not privy to how much is going into this business?
The point is that although the presidents, right from President Dwight D. Eisenhower, had in his parting speech when he was no longer, the last speech he made as a president, has said you must be careful, must watch the military-industrial complex, because they are in a, shall we say, government on its own. Because, and from that onwards, all the presidents have been, I would say, two things I would say, all the leaders in Europe as well. They are under the thumb of military-industrial complex, and secondly, even more worse is they are salesmen for the arms companies. I'll give you an example. When David Cameron, our own Prime Minister, went to Middle East, there are so many weapon manufacturers and companies and their bosses, CEOs, went with him to sell. Although Egypt was in transition, like we were having like we call the Arab Spring in the Tahrir Square.
Hosni Mubarak had just fallen.
Yeah, but he didn't care. He went in to see the military people and sold them lots of weapons. So when President Barack Obama went to India, and there was about 200 to 300 weapon manufacturers from the US companies who went with them, because they were dealing with nuclear energy. So they are trying to give them nuclear materials and things like that, which is big business. I mean, that can be just billions worth of US dollars every year. So they are not just that the military, they are under the thumb of the military, but they are even worse because they are the mouthpiece or direct salesmen on their behalf, as if they were not running the country, US or UK, but they were selling equipment and military for their country. Yeah? The other fact you have to see is that all the intelligence gathering and surveillance is done by military. So when it is done by military, and every day a report goes to the US President and to our Prime Minister and others. So do you think the military is only going to tell them the threats and where the conflicts are going to be. They are not going to suggest any alternatives to war, or they are not going to suggest any peaceful solutions, or don't worry, let's not go to war this time. Let's sit down the table and let's bring all the warring factions who are fighting with each other on the table and let's have peace. It doesn't keep them in a job.
So this is a very dangerous triangle, perhaps. You've got the politicians, you have the military, and you have the corporate sector.
And you got and they're all together in it.
And so there's a conflict of interest necessarily within those lobby groups which have a very, very close association with the Prime Minister or with the President. That within a democracy could be resolved, but again, it never gets tabled, never gets mooted. I've never heard of a situation in which the military, the corporate aspect of military hardware making has been brought to the front line as a major point of discussion. Quite often you see the politicians get dressed down. We've seen the media get dressed down. We've seen the bankers get dressed down. But these areas of security, intelligence, or the military defense side of things are the most sensitive, and it can be easily argued that look, this is sensitive information. It's classified. We can't go there. Is that often used, in your opinion, as a ruse to keep people away from what's going on?
I will go a step further. That if there was for a couple of weeks or 3 weeks not a roadside bomb went in Iraq or Afghanistan, or if the countries in Europe became too peaceful, the military industrial complex themselves will detonate bombs, give them to the rebels or give them to the insurgents and give to them, so that it's business as usual. So that all the countries, there should be some kind of conflict or tension in countries and fear in countries. And there is no more bigger fear in terrorism, which is absolutely a fantasy, which is a made up war, because it is like a unending war. You know, we had the First World War, it finished. And we had the Second World War, it finished. Although, and in the 20th century, we had 250 wars and 160 million lives were lost. But that is in the past. They have somehow or the other created in terrorism an unending war. So, if you are...
Terrorism is good business for the arms industry.
It's very good business, yeah. And yeah.
Well, you've gone through chapters again. We're running short of time, and I know we're going to continue this series and perhaps unearth these findings that you've dug up in the book in more detail. But military spending and its ill effects, the negative effects of conflicts and global on the global environment, the human security factor, refugees. There's so many issues that are the spin-off for this military spending and its abuse, if you like. You go on to talk about the folly of chronic wars for profit, resources, and domination. So more weapons, more wars, more profits. That's what we've just underlined there. I think in conclusion, what seems quite novel is that you're also then looking for solutions. You've done the critiquing and the fact that the US sells $3 billion worth of arms to Israel or $270 million worth of arms to Pakistan, and then shows it in the books as being part of the US State Department. So it almost looks like they've recouped the money that they've invested. There's these kind of dastardly tricks which are there within government circles to hide the amount of spending that's actually going on. Is there no ability within a democratic system to prevent that or stop that? Congress, for instance, or the House of Representatives. There's no point they can intervene and ask questions on these issues.
I mean the Pentagon, the accounts of Pentagon, which I found out, has never been audited. So unless or until they're auditable, it's only a guess how much they're spending, for how many billions per year they're spending. All we know is when they're asking for a new weapon program, they get the money. If I ask for some peace projects or some other, I don't get the money. So that's all I know. But again, I tell you what, time has come that I find that elites are losing control. I give you a few reasons. Because we have been deceived by lies, and we don't want to listen to any more lies. The politicians and political parties, they are now held in the lowest esteem in the world. Yeah? People are going away from conservative parties, labor parties, in droves. They are losing membership. Yeah? So you can see from the fact that the elites cannot control the citizens, and because of that the military and the police are getting more and more brutal, and that is a sign of, I would say, from my point of view, that we are on a tipping point.
People are waking up.
People are waking up. We are on a tipping point in history where a time has come, or as Victor Hugo put it, the time has come for an idea that not even the army can stop it. Or that time of a time we are living now, in which we have got organized campaigns like Arab Spring and Spanish Indignados, and we had the Turkish Spring and the Brazilian Spring, and people all over the world are not going to take it anymore, and they are standing up for their rights. Time has come where changes are being made, and like in the past when we had victories like non-violent victories like the civil rights movement and like the Indian independence movement, and recently we had the reunification of Germany, and all these been accomplished non-violently. And Europe in itself is a great example. We had the First World War, Second World War, and we have had wars for 50 years, 100 years, 500 years. But now a war between in Germany and France, or France and UK, is inconceivable, because we are doing 20-30 billion trade with each other. So we are coming to a point where citizens are finally may be able to grip to power, and also may be able to turn the corner in which we can live in a equitable world, in a sustainable world. And all these I have written. Once I wrote the book and I said, how are we going to make the things happen?
This is what I wanted to come to, is that you've talked about the problem, and now you talk about hope, and you talk about the possibility that people are waking up, which is a really positive message to perhaps begin to buy out on. But replacing the military-industrial complex, as you could put it, and making the 21st century the century of soft power, is this your vision for how we can replace the current mentality of militarization and basically conflict?
Yeah. So once I wrote the book, then I made a film, Change the World, in which I showed how people had destruction during Hiroshima and Nagasaki and things like that. And then I brought along peace heroes like Gandhi and Martin Luther King, etc., to show how they changed the world, Indian independence movements, and how can we learn from them. And then I started a campaign called 4D for World Peace, which was 4D standing for disarmament, demilitarization, development, and democracy. And that campaign we are taking forward to resolve, to bring a peaceful world.
Well, that sounds fascinating, because not only have you diagnosed the problem and actually exposed a lot of the hypocrisy perhaps of the arms industry in the world, but you're actually posing a solution but then acting on it. And that's a fantastic conclusion almost, to say that there is a legacy, not only a legacy, but actually you're turning it into a reality. And we're very much about campaigning for peace on Ahlebait TV, and we're very much for justice and equality and these sort of issues. So it's wonderful to see that such an intrepid exercise in intellectual research is now manifesting itself in a real world campaign. Will we see very much of this campaign in Britain?
Yes. It's already, I've been 30 or 40 places to speak about the campaign, and we are in the process of taking it to Europe and to India and other places.
So there'll be new engagements
New
announced
engagements
soon?
happening soon, yes.
Okay, so watch this space. We've touched on such a wide series of issues, but at the heart of this whole issue seems to be the ethical and moral question around what the role of arms and the arms industry is within modern society. Can nations live without being under the terror of the other and having to tool up with some of the worst known weapons that man has ever constructed hanging over our heads? This is the big question. Vijay Mehta has given us a positive message to say that the solution lies in the people. It lies in the awakening of the ordinary masses to understand the dynamics of economics, the arms industry and the politicians. Perhaps that's where we've got to focus and look at how we can exercise our democratic right not to have war imposed around the world, conflict preyed upon by profiteers. And I think this profiteering from the death of innocents is far more worrying. But it seems that the civilian population or ordinary people perhaps need to wake up not just to the symptoms of the arms industry's effects, i.e. the wars that we see, which often get attributed to nations or to religion or to individual dictators, but actually something far more insidious, far deeper lies at the root of the cause of all these wars, and that could be the propagation of the arms industry. On that note, we're going to say goodbye to you from the Ahlebait team until the next edition. Assalamu alaikum and Khuda Hafiz.